Good morning, Damon. I'm very happy to have you here and to give the Green Film Festival a start and with this interview. So I know that you have done wonder around the world of documentaries, but I would like yourself to introduce yourself because it's maybe much better.
I think it's firstly wonderful to for you to invite me to be sort of have a chat with you about it. I think the Green Film Festival is an amazing initiative, and I think there's from knowing you, Alessandra, I think there's a lot of energy behind it, which will really carry it through and make it something successful. So I think it's wonderful. I've lived in Africa all my life. I've traveled around the world. We've always made films that really, I suppose, try and get to the connection between an environment and people. When we started many years ago, there was somehow, I think, a sense that people and nature were separate somehow in film. There was always sort of beautiful films about nature, but people weren't often part of that in some way. And I don't know, we've just always brought those two together, and that's really where we have made different films around the world and have been excited to be sort of trying to show that, and it's been an exciting journey for us. So I think a festival like yourselves plays a big part of filmmaking, because it allows people to experience, to get the films out. It's a very important part of actual filmmaking. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Damon. So what was the sparkle that ignited your choice of being a filmmaker and caring for the environment?
You know, I suppose we never were sort of, I suppose, grew up as film aficionados or special, like film was a tool, really. I suppose and I have to, I suppose, if I think of growing up as a young child, my grandparents played a big role in our lives. My parents were working, and my grandparents, my great grandparents were around us as in our sort of very formative years. And my grandmother was a person who used to travel a lot in Africa in the sort of those days of the safaris, and she used to come back and tell these stories of being sort of charged by hippos, or the boat being sort of bitten by a hippo, or elephants charging them. And they're always sort of quite sort of exciting as a young child, I suppose, to hear these stories. So we were always keen to go and experience sort of real Africa, and I suppose that was the earliest sort of influence we had in our lives, and that grew into a life of trying to make films in Africa.
I think this is wonderful, because Africa is really, I mean, a special place, and everybody that is living this kind of life is getting something very special. It's a kind of award for life, I think.
I think I think the perception often is to portray Africa as a sort of a dark place, and there's sort of crime, or there's poverty and these issues, which I don't want to demean or try and pretend that it's all wonderful, and obviously there are challenges, but there is I think a wisdom in Africa, often in rural Africa, in the sort of connection, the bonds between people and nature, and there's a sort of reciprocity that's somehow deeply understood, and often I think that's not celebrated enough. I think African wisdom, indigenous knowledge systems, are something that should be celebrated more. Yeah, I agree with you.
Absolutely, and I see that in your movies, in your documentaries. I mean, when you see them, you have the feeling really of being in a different world, on a different planet, and this connection between the animals and man, it's totally magic and sacred. I feel this, and so this is the difficult part also when you're doing a documentary. How can you really film this kind of scenes and innovation that you put in your movies?
No, I think we have to realize, I suppose, that our journey that we've all, modernity has sort of somehow separated ourselves from nature. I think the journey we've all been on for a long time as a species has been one of sort of almost moving away from nature. And I think at times like we're all living through, the crisis, the pandemic crisis we're all experiencing anywhere in the world, we're all touched by it in a deep way. I think it reminds us, and it's easy now in the sort of macro term, the short term, to suddenly realize, oh, nature is, or we are reliant. But I think it shouldn't take a sort of a life-threatening event, be it a climate change event or some major sort of intervention to make us realize that we actually are all part of nature. And I think it's almost, I suppose it reminds me a little bit like my little son is 9 years old, Oliver, and is the huge focus in our lives, obviously. And he's coming to that phase where he's trying to be sort of almost just get his own little independence, and he sort of doesn't think he needs us as much, and he rushes off and does things. And only when something happens of, a small little crisis in his life, does he run to his mum, and he realizes, no, actually, he still needs his mum and dad. And I think we all like that at the moment. We sort of like this little 9-year-old, and we have to almost realize, get a better perspective on our relationship and our sort of almost our cosmology in a way, our sense of relationship with the world around us, and realize that no matter how our financial independence or what we have in materialism, it doesn't separate us. And I think we just often, if we live in cities, it's perhaps people say it's harder to connect, but really nature and wilderness is all around us. If you're in an office block in New York or in Italy, wherever we all live, we look up at the night sky and we realize that's the greatest wilderness around us. We can tap into it, I think, and feel it even under sort of these strange times. So I think it's important to try and individually connect and then realize that it's a positive thing. I think often conservation has a negative message in some sense. It's sort of, there's often a don't do this, don't use, use green coffees or whatever it is. It's these capsules are dangerous for the landfills. Or there's a lot of, which are all, I suppose positive messages or good messages, but there's a lot of sort of things of don't do. But I think often we must realize that by connecting, there's a lot of enhancement in our lives. We will feel far more connected, at peace, and realize where we fit in. So I think we need to build on those positive affirmation messages, and I think that will help.
So you answered my question about rebuilding this connection. That's super nice. I mean, I think that you say respect and cosmology are the things that we have probably to start with. Respect for nature as the first step that we all can take.
No, I think and respect is obviously a good thing, but I think we have to realize that it will enhance our lives. It's going to make our lives better, and I think we can't separate ourselves from nature. We do it at our own peril. I mean, the sort of all societies that have fought. I mean, I don't want to use the analogy of the Romans, you being Italian, but it's we all the greatest cultures fail because of arrogance, and we must be careful. Not in all our societies today to be arrogant and realize we don't need nature, or nature's of somehow we can control it, or not be reliant on it. And I think that arrogance is the danger, and we have to realize the opposite is true, and work with it and use it as a way of enhancing our lives. We make things sustainable for nature and the future generations. I think the challenge often is decisions we make are not things that sort of affect us today. We very short term, sort of our views are often very short sort of perspectives on where we're going, and perhaps it's the wisdom is to look at it from a longer point of view and make decisions that will affect the lives of, like, my son's, Oliver's son. That you have to make those sort of long-term decisions as well, but equally they will benefit us in the short term. But try and get that perspective right.
Absolutely. So and instead, what will you say the two most important things maybe that you will say to a young person who would like to study and work and care for the environment?
I think firstly, let's be honest, we have to be realistic. There's huge upside and there's huge challenges. You know, I think one has to understand that. I think when you start, you have to find your niche, your what message you want to tell within that space. It's not just I suppose, good enough really to sort of, I want to make films about caring for the environment. You've got to find your niche, your focus within that. And film is a great tool because it can really I think the greatest positive thing it can do is affect people emotionally. People can emotionally change or connect, which is I think a big driver in creating a different way of building our relationship again with nature. So I think for young people, for anybody getting involved, I think one has to build resilience. You have to realize that there's an insecurity within the film industry of project by project often, and there's not often a sort of salary every month, and one has to be able to accept that and have confidence and belief that things will work out. That's always, as a young person, I think, a challenge. But the upside is to experience things that most people never get to experience, to go to places and often work with people whose life work has been to understand a certain biome, a certain environment, a certain animal, a certain whatever it is, if it's a forest or something that they've spent a life, and you get this incredible blessing to be able to access that and experience it through them. Often it's an amazing gift which filmmakers receive, I think. But I think there's so many stories to tell. There's so many. The world's changing, so there's so many exciting films to make, and I think one's just got to create your film language that sort of that you connect to, and identify the type of stories you want. And that sounds very sort of almost easy, but it's actually quite hard. It's a great challenge when you're starting out, because you need to sort of almost understand yourself first, and then it's easier to tell the stories that you want. But I suppose with any career, there are these challenges. But it's a wonderful, exciting opportunity to get involved in as a young person, and I would obviously encourage people to explore it. It's been wonderful for us.
Absolutely. If I could change my life now, I probably will start this to experience this indeed.
Yeah, I think that quite a few years ago, the obstacles were almost greater. The technology, the equipment was more expensive. The sort of the accessibility was greater. But now it's sort of changed. But the challenge has perhaps grown. I think the sort of to get in, you have to one really has to try and do things differently, and it's more focused on creativity and things. So, but it's a great. I would encourage people, and I think there's lots of opportunity. We haven't really scratched the surface of what we can do within the film world.
Yeah. So, what will be your special message instead to Africans and South Africans, and particularly filmmakers? Do you have a message for them?
I suppose I don't want to sort of preach as if one knows it. I think all one doesn't be limited by other people's advice sometimes. I think that's why I'm always a bit hesitant in telling people, oh, you must do it like this or do it like that, because everybody's different. And I think in Africa, there's just so many incredible personal stories. I think a perspective that I suppose I would like to share is in all film, I think there's a small story and there's a big story. And the small story is the sort of individual story of a person or an animal or something that takes you through. And then there's the big message, the big feeling, what that sort of the small story is the analogy for the big story. And often when you pitch in the film, you need to tell the small story because people buy into that. They can relate to that in a far quicker way. And I would say, there's so many of these stories around, I think, and often because one's so close to them, perhaps in Africa, one doesn't realize how special they are. But you have to almost put that big story perspective on to realize that that person who's able to do that, or if if he lives near the game reserves and he's able to have a relationship with a wild elephant, whatever, I'm making things up, but if that is what you're seeing as you go past that environment, it shows this incredible bigger story, and you have to sort of almost put a perspective on it, and that allows you to tell the story in a way that connects both the big and the small story. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the sort of, I think, perhaps my, not advice, but I think one can think about that as a way of telling these stories and getting the stories heard by attracting support for you to make the films.
Absolutely. And so you are so passionate. What will be your next story to tell? You have something in mind?
No, I think we're still thinking about different ideas. There's always ideas that we've been working with. Some of them that we've been working for a long time that don't necessarily they come out at different times. It's a strange thing. We sort of each sort of film that we're able to get support for is a sort of, not a small miracle, but it's sort of it has to sort of happen within its just right space. But no, I think there's one's looking at different projects, small projects, big projects. There's nothing sort of, I think, fundamental that is suddenly going to come out in the short term. But we're always open to ideas.
Yeah. And will you bring on board some young, maybe intern, let's say, somebody that is willing to learn from you?
We often work with interns. We have in the past for a long time, like amazingly talented folk. And we hope to create these win-win relationships where they've perhaps got more energy than us and skills than us in different ways. And then we work together, which is great. I think it's always, I think collaboration is also a key aspect of all filmmaking. So I think it's always it's what makes it special is the collaboration. These different, it's not, as soon as you dictate one, and certainly in documentary terms, if one person's perspective is the only way, it just sort of, the magic doesn't happen. So the collaboration in filmmaking is what makes it often very special.
And what do you think about patience and perseverance? Are these qualities that we need in this world of documentaries?
No, I think perseverance I think you'll be sort of pushed, or the idea will be sort of, you'll be so many obstacles. So you have to have huge perseverance. I think you must be impatient for action, but patient for results. I think there's a difference, but I think it depends on your style of filmmaking. Some people will sit and be impatient for weeks and months and trying to get one scene or literally, a few seconds of film, and that takes incredible patience. That style of filmmaking. So it depends on your style, and often, one has to be. I think perseverance is perhaps more important than being patient, if I could say.
Absolutely. So there is anything else that you would like to add and a message to the people that are listening?
No, just,
to the others, because you gave many.
I think, if you make a film, it's an achievement. I think one learns so much through it, and I can only say that it's a wonderful. So much work, as you know, goes into making films, and each one of them is special in their own way. And I would celebrate all the films that people make, and especially with the festival like yourselves, the Green Film Festival. I think people are so excited at the moment to try and access different perspectives on nature and the environment. And I think each perspective should be challenging and interesting in its own way. And I would only encourage you to celebrate it all, and good luck. And I think it's a fantastic time in our sort of journey to celebrate films of this nature. So well done to everybody involved.
Thank you so much. We hope to bring our sparkle also to this world, and to help communities to be visible and to be under the spotlight, to bring more care and possibilities for the environment. So we are very happy to have you here in this little interview and celebrate with you also.
Anytime, and it's wonderful to just, I think one can feel the passion in your voice, Alessandra, and I think that's the magic sauce, is to have that passion like you have, and it's exciting, and thank you for your contribution. I think you're doing an amazing job.